Welcome back to another episode. After last week's discussion on cybersecurity in healthcare, we received a flood of questions and requests for more information from our listeners. With healthcare data becoming increasingly digitalized and targeted by cyber threats, it's a topic that demands our attention. So, for this week's episode, we decided to hold a second round of discussions on the topic. We've brought back our guest and expert in the community practice space, Rusty Massey, for his insight as a senior leader. As we typically do before we dive into our core discussion, T will catch us up on some of the latest cyber events so that we can break them down for you. So grab a cup of coffee and settle in. We've got a jam-packed episode ahead on the Cybersecurity Boardroom. Welcome, T. So what do we have going on this week on
Well,
the events side of the house? What's been transpiring?
yeah, so we've actually got quite a bit going on. I think the first thing I'm going to talk about is the FBI actually just released a warning to U.S. retail companies about a financially motivated group. Their name is Storm 0539. And it's kind of interesting. What they're doing is they're targeting employees in gift card departments within retail organizations. And they're using some sophisticated phishing techniques and attacks. They've been doing this since the beginning of the year, since January 2024. And the goal of these attacks is to compromise employees' accounts and get access to, to generate fraudulent gift cards and actually steal sensitive data like SSH keys and passwords. And what's pretty interesting about this one is that this group Storm 0539, they're using a phishing kit which is capable of bypassing MFA. So I know we talk about having strong MFA in place is very important. And this just shows an instance where it's important to have sort of a layered approach there, which I guess we can talk about here in a bit. But so what they're doing is they're targeting these retail employees, they're targeting their personal devices, their cell phones, computers. They're gaining access, they're moving laterally, and they're compromising, or they're going after compromised accounts from there. And so this just kind of demonstrates the adaptability and persistence of groups like this and sort of adapting their techniques to the current environment.
So if I understand correctly, they're targeting folks in retail. So it could
Right.
be employees in the actual stores, in the retail environments,
Yep.
access to their accounts, and then work laterally to get into the area that they're actually trying to penetrate into, and that's the gift card department, or folks working or have privilege within gift card.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
MFA, we talk about multi-factor authentication as being one of the basic requirements of what we need to do to protect our environments. This
Yeah.
just showed that in this case, the MFA was not enough. It further supports, I think, the approach that we need to have a layered approach to security. So it's not just a single solution. You have to have layers of a solution to be able to identify and trap um, uh, assailants. Um, if I think retail, T, when I was a kid, I worked in a retail environment.
Yeah.
When I was at Fujitsu, I worked in retail in the retail organization, so pretty familiar with retail. The persona is something that I've always considered, and something I think we need to continue to consider. People that you have that work in a retail environment, you've got seasonal workers, you've got part-time workers, people that hold multiple jobs, you've got different profiles of people with different levels of understanding from a technology perspective or a business perspective. Training these people, we talk about training these people is difficult. So I
Yeah.
think in those areas, you've got to really focus hard on the solutions that surround the network access capability, because of the fact that phishing is a huge risk in that area. I also think that maybe a different solution. I know we talked about different solutions in the past, but passwordless may be more of a viable option in that type of environment.
Mhm.
Passwordless solutions, to include biometrics or access by mobile device or a security key that's stored on a desktop. That may be the additional layer that you need to avoid a risk like that, and also segmenting what people have access to. So if you're in a retail environment, segmenting the network access that they have versus someone that's working in home office. So really providing people with the access to what they really need at that moment is absolutely key. So there are a lot of solutions out there. I think that people could benefit from. I think of um, tokenized data. I think of zero trust. Those
Yep.
are all great solutions. I think that mitigate a lot of this.
So the next one here, kind of going global.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Finland, the city of Helsinki,
Mm-hmm.
breached recently, and this affected their education department. So 120,000 students, teachers, guardians, administrators, they had information that was leaked. And you know what it was due to?
Was that?
Vulnerability in their what was it? Remote server, a remote access server. So they had a vulnerability that had gone unpatched, and it was exploited. And to me, this just highlights the need to continually evaluate your configurations, not
Mm.
only CS benchmarks and your whatever regulatory framework you're working with, but also the vendor best practices, and staying up to date with those patches as they come out, and making sure that they're remediated and patched in a timely manner.
Yeah, we often talk about the safeguard phase of security. If you need to put a lot of effort towards safeguarding your environment and continually doing so, and having policy and process in place that drives that continual evaluation. Things change. You need to be able to catch them when they change because you're not always notified, and you need to be able to evaluate them so that you can secure the environment. I know this is an international one, but if this happened in the US, right away, first thing that comes to mind is I think of FERPA. So if you are releasing information that is goes against FERPA compliance regulations, you're subject to a whole bunch of fines, right? And those students and parents that are affected may have recourse. And so in the U.S., I mean, 120,000 students is a lot. Not all of the school districts we've got in the U.S. are 120,000 students, but we've got huge districts that have in excess of 200,000 students. Even some of the medium-sized districts with 40 50,000 students, 10,000 students, it's still very impactful. So I think it's a good lesson learned and an opportunity. I think that we need to remember to look outside of what's happening in the US to learn, to get some lessons learned to drive some of our best practices. So we shouldn't always be looking within. It's important to look outside of our box and see what's going on elsewhere and leverage that information to drive our best practices as well.
What's interesting is that I think a lot of folks probably wouldn't consider an education department or a school or anything like that a high value target. Probably not high up on their list of organizations they think are going to get breached.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it just shows a reason why we've got to have good cyber posture across domains, across
Yeah,
industries.
education is big business. There's a lot of money spent at the federal, state, local level as it pertains to education, whether it's privatized or public. Wherever there's money, there are going to be people trying to manipulate and hack in. Guaranteed.
Yeah, so Vince, the last one we have for you today, this one's about Ascension Healthcare Systems. I'm sure a lot of listeners have actually heard about this one in the news. Pretty recent, hugely impactful breach, especially on the heels of the Change Healthcare incident recently. 140 hospitals across 19 states. This is a pretty big company here. And what happened was there was a cyber attack. Attackers were able to gain access to a certain portion of their network, actually a very large portion. I mean, lots of systems were impacted. We're talking electronic health records, charting software, communication software, medication ordering and testing services. Those were also disrupted. They had to shut down their network entirely. So
Mm.
they had to moving to manual operations. They had to cancel elective procedures. They even went so far as instructing certain patients to come in with detailed information about their condition because they didn't have the record, right? So hugely impactful there. Um, uh,
Do we know the cause?
the cause, so we don't know the extent of the breach. They're still investigating,
Mm-hmm.
but this is again hugely impactful, and it's really surprising to see another
Right.
one.
The fact that they shut off the network tells me that they didn't know what was going on and didn't know how to stop them other than to turn it off. And so their strategy for dealing with the attack, so
Mhm.
there's different frameworks out there that you can leverage. I think of MITRE, for example, um, was not, they just didn't know what was going on. And so when you don't know, you just shut it off. So clearly, there's some vulnerability there, but also feels to me like there's some vulnerability in the process, procedures, policies that they've got not to be able to isolate the
Mhm.
bad act, identify, isolate the bad actor, and then remove them from the environment in a manner that didn't require for everything to be taken down.
Yeah.
I think of the operational aspect. So you've got all these procedures that are taking place in hospitals, you've got emergency rooms. That's my biggest thing is I look at it and say, okay, so if I look at a business and I say, regardless as to what you are, hospital or not, lost revenue. I see that right away. I see stranded costs because I've got, specialists, doctors. We've got nurses and all that stuff, that good stuff, and we've got stranded costs there because those folks are still there getting paid, regardless as to whether or not operations are moving forward. But I think of the people, the patients. Think of the risk that you impose on patients. So if they redirected patients to go to another hospital, okay, they did that. That's great. Does that hospital have the capacity to be able to deal with an influx of patients coming in from a large hospital? That's worrisome. If I'm a patient, I'm thinking to myself that, I'm going to a new place. They may not have all my information and, they don't have the capacity to deal with me. Therefore, their treatment of whatever condition I've got is not efficient. I think of the delays. So if I'm being rerouted to another hospital, that efficiency, and I've got an urgent condition, that impacts
Huge
me
impact.
as a human, right? So yeah, there's the operational impact, but there's the patient impact, that fallout that we need to also consider. You've got a moral, obligation here to be able to provide that service and to secure your environment. So there's a lot going on there. And then they're going to have all the costs, right? Ascension Healthcare, as it pertains to the fallout, the forensics, figuring out what happened,
Yeah.
fixing, putting in place solutions to mitigate going forward, the regulatory requirements that they've got. They operate in how many? 19 states, you say?
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
they're
like
gonna
19 states now looking over your shoulder and looking to see where they can potentially impose fines on you.
yeah, yeah.
It's
I
huge.
I would, I mean, with these healthcare breaches, I mean, and they're so large and so impactful. I mean, I would expect to see some sort of maybe some legislative action come from this. I mean, as we continue to see these
Right.
breaches and these incidents, I think folks are really going to start to take notice here,
Right.
especially for critical public service.
I agree. I agree. There needs to be some form of intervention that drives behavior.
Mhm.
Just needs to be, and this affects the public, and so we need to make sure that any service or solution that impacts the public, especially in health,
Yeah,
is it gets addressed right away.
yeah. Yeah. So, and I think this is a great segue into our core topic for the day, which is healthcare, with our guest, Rusty Macy.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things happened recently, events that really has woken a lot of people up. The Change Healthcare event back in February, then recently this past week with Ascension. That's having a huge impact to these practices and disrupts their cash flow and their ability to run their practice. So definitely it's been a wake up call. And I think if you look at what most people are doing, they feel like they have a plan in place for protection. They're partnered with someone that is doing ultimately what they think is the right thing. And, there was a couple community practices just this year that have been hacked, individual practices, and that's very disruptive, but it's also very expensive too.
Mm.
And I think there's been enough noise in the last few weeks to where definitely it's on everybody's mind right
Just generally, the smaller practices, they'll typically outsource their IT services to a third party. And within that outsourcing agreement, there's clauses in there as it pertains to cyber that third party will conduct specific activity. However, they're not really vetting it out other than checking a box saying that they are going to provide the service. When we think of a cyber attack, it doesn't start at the attack. You know what I mean? It starts at the manner in which you safeguard your environment. So the activity that you conduct. So from a policy, process, procedural perspective, how you deal with your IT, how that aligns to your corporate risk process and policies, how you deal with changes in your environment on the fly, the scheduled stuff. So, really how you focus on safeguarding. And then when there's an actual breach or there's a bad actor that does something in the environment to compromise you, how you and your IT department and the rest of the business collaborate to be able to identify that scenario or that situation and then resolve it quickly while mitigating impact. And then there's the whole recovery phase, right? How do you deal with your banks if your cash has been compromised? How do you deal with potential regulatory compliance fines that will be coming your way through these assessments, whether through HIPAA or through PCI, especially if you're practice, you're going to be dealing with those two. How do you deal with your insurance if you're trying to file a claim and then need to justify what your security posture was? And your security posture is not just what you have in place from an IT security perspective, but what you have in place to ensure that folks are properly trained and fully understand the risks that they face when dealing with security. So how do you tie all that back, and how do you tie that into legal? What if you have litigation that comes your way? There's a lot that goes into cybersecurity. And if we think that having an outsourced third party organization that's simply saying, yeah, we'll conduct X, Y, Z activity and that covers you for cyber, that's a big risk. It's a big red flag. And I think folks need to be looking at that a lot more closely. And especially when we're talking at the practice level, how many practices are there, Rusty, just generally in the US?
now. Oh, thousands. I mean, thousands of community-based independent practices all over the country in every specialty.
All
So
right.
yeah, thousands.
And like any organization, they have their own flavor, right? They each have their own setup, they each have their own requirements. And so there's no cookie cutter solution that says, hey, you need to do this and you're covered. And so each and every single one of those organizations needs to be able to set themselves up to be able to adjust their risk management, their IT security policies, practices, procedures, right? They all need to have their own configuration. So who is accountable in a practice
Yeah,
for
good question.
for
Ultimately,
risk in general? Risk in general.
yeah, it's ultimately the physician. I mean, the physician practice, the lead physician, the owner of the practice, and then your executive director, your practice manager, whoever it may be. But ultimately, they're the ones that are responsible for ensuring that they're properly protected, safeguarded. You mentioned a couple of key things. The ongoing training. The bad actors, they're smart and they keep looking for ways to get in. If
Mhm.
they focus on you and they're trying to get in, they're eventually going to get in. So it can't be we set up cybersecurity protocols 3 years ago and we're done.
Yeah.
It's ongoing, and that's why I think you mentioned the training. That's really important. I mean, I think if you think about your team, they're busy and they're in the lab, they're providing patient care, whatever the role is of every employee in a practice. Their heads down, focused on what they're supposed to do. In
Right.
cybersecurity, that may not be top of mind for everybody in the practice. So that's why the awareness, the training, upgrading your systems, making sure that you do independent audits and security threat checks to make sure that what you have in place is working. But I think the communication with everybody in the practice is really key. And then the accountability and responsibility that ultimately is the leadership of the practice.
So if someone outsources their, let's say, their IT, and to a managed services provider, for example, and that MSP comes back and says, hey, we can do all these things for you. We're able to help you verify your compliance for HIPAA, for PCI, all that good stuff. Is that enough? If I own risk within my own practice as the lead physician, the owner, if you will, for me to trust that they're able to come back and just, that what they validate for me that they've done and what they'll continue to do when something happens, and allow for me to fill in my criteria or my documentation for compliance for, say, HIPAA, is that enough?
I think of it as an insurance policy, Vince. Like, we all have our properties insured, and you hope that you never have to use insurance. And you have it until you need it, and hopefully you never have to use it. Same thing with cybersecurity. I think that, whatever you invest and how you develop your strategy to protect,
Mhm.
that's key, and it's ongoing. Again, these actors, they get more sophisticated, and, you guys know very well that you're only as good as you are. And if you don't know what you don't know, you may not be checking all the right boxes. So I think having a good partner is really critical. And then helping educate. There's a huge opportunity in every business, not just healthcare, to better educate around all these attacks. Look, they've increased over the last 2 or 3 years. You've seen more and more big corporations being attacked, and
Mhm.
recently you're seeing a lot of stuff happen in the healthcare segment. But yeah, it's awareness, education, and training, and I think developing the right strategy
Mhm.
and finding the right partner to do that with. It's
Right.
really key.
When we talk about ways to improve the cyber posture for these health community healthcare organizations, I think it's about moving away from a check the box mentality to a more of an ongoing mentality. So I mean, we work with a lot of smaller organizations that they outsource their HIPAA compliance, and they'll say, hey, we're covered. We've got these folks that do HIPAA training once a year, twice a year for our folks. Boxes checked, we're good. We've literally had these conversations with folks, and I think it's about moving to more monthly training, possibly, or maybe quarterly, but definitely more frequently than every 6 months or once a year. And the reason for that is that these threats, they're constantly evolving, but I think it's also about creating that culture of awareness. It's really creating a culture where people are aware that anytime you're connected to a network, you're connected to the internet. There are threats out there, and you've got to safeguard that patient data and the operations as well.
Is uh is your phone the internet?
Your phone's connected to the internet, and
So,
it's not just your phone. When you talk about a healthcare organization, it's all of the devices
mm,
that are connected to the internet that were not purpose built with cyber in mind. They were built to affect that specific healthcare function, but
right.
there are gaps and vulnerabilities there. So it's being aware that any device that you have connected to the internet
Right.
represents threat vector, and it's got to be protected.
I
So you
agree.
bring up a good point too. If you think back to post COVID, more and more employees work remotely, and that too creates risk. And even in the practices, some of the staff, they work remotely now from home, and that definitely creates risk. What are you seeing in that regard? Like, do you see more attacks or vulnerabilities where you have remote workers compared to people being in office on mainframe?
Yeah. So, I mean, having a distributed workforce where you've got folks, working here, they're working from home, working from Starbucks, that certainly presents more opportunities for threat actors to get in. And, VPNs have been around for a while, but even those, may not always be secure. Ivanti, I'm sure you've heard about them, and they've had multiple vulnerabilities come out. Lots of folks aren't using them anymore. So, absolutely, a distributed workforce presents opportunities for bad actors to come in and do bad things. And since COVID and since the increase in work from home, we have seen more attacks.
AI has a huge role to play when we're talking about uh, training and phishing. If we think of the fact that there's definite increase in the amount of AI that the bad actors are leveraging to be able to hit up um, organizations. So the tactics within their overall strategy, leverage a lot of different AI components, means that there is a lot of activity taking place simultaneously to hit up an organization, right? And there's the scenarios, how people respond, how systems respond, are all planned out and all thought out, right? And so AI is continually evolving from that, in that threat landscape increases, continually changes in complexity. And so that means that when we're talking about training people, we need to be able to leverage AI to train our people as well. So you need to leverage AI to come up with the scenarios. You also need to have AI engaged in phishing and training, because that's the real deal that people need to understand. It's not just an email going out to somebody and saying, hey, can you attempt? You get in. Oh, you gave information that you weren't supposed to. Why don't you take this little training? It's a start, but you need to include AI and all that as well. It's a lot more complex than it used to be. It's not just about the annual training, ticking the box, right? So leveraging AI is a huge, huge thing. And I'll put just one stat maybe to help put that in perspective. In 2019, the amount of time that it took for a ransom attack to take effect. So from the moment where they started planning to the moment where they actually got in and brought you down and demanded ransom, in 2019, that average duration was 60 days, right? In 2023, that average duration is 4 days. It just gets faster and faster and faster. And so if we keep the same tactics in training our folks and doing the same thing over and over and over, we're just helping that cause. We need to leverage AI. We need to leverage generative AI. We need to be careful about a concept called hallucination. So hallucination within AI is when you depend on AI and AI provides you with false information. So there are systems, AI systems, that are designed to provide you with false information. So you do the wrong thing so that then they can come in and they can attack you knowing that they led you down the wrong path. So you need to have systems in place that are also robust enough to determine whether there's a hallucination within the AI that is being leveraged. So it starts getting quite complex. We're always walking a fine line on this podcast because I really want folks in the business community to understand risk and to understand what the technology is capable of, and to try to translate that for some folks and educate them. But at the same time, I don't want us to sound like town criers, right? We don't want to be fear mongers saying, hey, it has to be this way, and or else you're going to fail. But there's a reality here. There's a risk. And so we need to call out that risk. I feel we owe it to folks to call out that risk.
I think it's a buzzword. I mean, I think everybody hears AI. The last 3 or 4 years, you hear all these things about AI. People are not really familiar with AI, what it really can do, but it's very powerful, used the right way. But yeah, I see AI being integrated into basically every system. It helps us work smarter, identify opportunities, things like that. And cybersecurity, as you alluded to, you got to be able to outpace the hackers and the people that are bad actors in the space. So yeah, AI's here. It's coming. I think a lot of people are asking more questions. They realize that they need to embrace AI and use it in a way to help them become more efficient, or to better run their business. So yeah, definitely AI is a huge buzzword. It's at every conference now. People talking about the uses of AI, whether you're in the pharmaceutical industry, healthcare, banking, whatever it may be. AI is here and it's here to stay.
Having worked with a lot of organizations just in automation in general and leveraging AI concepts within organizations, the first challenge you have is understanding your business processes, making sure that they're well documented, and then you start looking to see, okay, how can I improve upon them from a process optimization point of view? Where can I remove waste, things of that nature? And then what can I automate? The steps to implementing AI in an organization for it to be effective, truly effective, are there's multiple steps, right? And so it's not as easy as just turning it on. When it comes to cyber, it's the same thing. It's not as easy as just turning it on. You've got to understand what your business practices are, then adapt your implementation of your tools to your business practices, and then also focus on continually improving upon your business practices from a risk mitigation perspective. So it's really multifaceted. And so that's why I sound the alarm when I see folks that say, hey, buy my product, throw it in there, and I guarantee you it's going to work and you'll be good. You'll find out if it'll be good or not. Problem is, when you find out is once you've been attacked, and it may be too late for your business at that point. Right. The average breach in the globally is cost about $4 million. That's the average breach globally. In the US, that breach is double. That's the cost to an organization. And so I know at the practice level, there's a lot of smaller community practices. They look at those numbers, they say, yeah, that's not really us. That number doesn't represent us because we're small. This is because it's taking all the averages of all the big companies that are out there and all those different breaches. You're right, it does take all those averages, but $4 million or $8 million to a large organization, does it equate to $50,000 in your organization? Can people afford to take that $50,000 or $100,000 hit in their organization? I don't know of any SMB that would be able to really absorb that without some sort of impact, right? So it's about taking things in perspective.
Yeah. And it's not just the amount of the ransomware or ransom either. It, how long are your operations shut down for? How much revenue are you losing that way? What kind of legal fees do you have now mounting?
Right.
So plaintiff's attorneys coming
right.
at you.
So the normal course of business will be impacted and will be changed indefinitely in your organization until you put in what it is that you need to be able to recover, and then allow for them to authorize you to gain entry back in. So that's where a lot of the delays come in as well. Is, okay, I've got the attacker out, or I've got the exposure contained. It's good. Now you've got to start working on convincing folks, right? Convincing folks that I'm good, not just my customers, but the organizations that I interact with that let me into their systems.
That's good
day to day, right? So, what does the future of cybersecurity in healthcare look like for you as a non-IT executive? What do you think, as someone that's an expert in your space in healthcare, what do you think the future looks like?
It'll continue to evolve. That's like we said earlier. I think there's so many systems out there trying to catch the vulnerabilities of any business. And I think as you look in healthcare specifically, you've got so many factors. You've got HIPAA, and you've got all the patient data and all of that that's there. It's very, very risky if you're not taking steps to prevent these type of threats and hacks. So I see where healthcare is going, especially on the heels of these last two big breaches, that they're more aware. I think that creates the level of awareness that, hey, we need to revisit and look at what we're doing to see if it's enough. And as you prevent attacks and you continually upgrade your system, you're going to have to continually do it. It's not like we fixed this and now we can focus back on our patients. It's ongoing. So somebody has to own that in the practice or in any business, and they have to be committed to doing everything to raise the awareness with all employees and all vendors that touch their system. And I think that's the evolution. I do think that there's an opportunity here, again, for more education, more training, more communication around these threats and how people are being exposed. And I think that'll create awareness. And I think that'll lead to a safer environment long term.
The future will involve, of course, growing the awareness that there's risk out there. That future is going to include, people coming into the market and presenting solutions that are more unified, that allow people, to have a more comprehensive approach. And that's from the end user perspective. But I also think about things like quantum computing, which, we're still on the tip of that, but we're depending on who you ask, 5 to 10 years away from that. But what quantum computing is going to be, things we're going to have faster, more powerful processors, faster, more powerful computers. And then I'm going a little bit out on a limb here, but fusion, we've had some recent advances there. So when you think about unlimited energy, very powerful computers, and then generative or advanced general intelligence, those are all things that are going to allow threat actors to become more dangerous.
Mhm.
They're also things that are going to help you know executives and folks in the healthcare industry become more offensive as well.
We just talk about AI, generative AI, all these different things. The future of cyber in healthcare, as far as I see it, is really, it's reciprocal. You'll have it on both ends. You'll have it from a defense perspective. You'll have it from an offense perspective. So whichever side of the spectrum you're on, you're going to be able to leverage that technology. So it's whoever gets there first. All this to say is, if you're not leveraging any type of technology, you're 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 not playing on any side, right? You're
Yeah.
really exposed. So I keep talking about it, and we keep talking about generative AI and AI, because if you're not considering that as part of your solution, that's where your risks are going to be. In this year, I really think the biggest risks, or the things that we're going to see in healthcare, are really going to tie around deep fakes. There's going to be a lot more of an increase in deep fakes as generative AI capabilities increase. It's a natural, evolution that we're going to see more of those. So we're going to continue to see a lot of phishing, attacks, trying to solicit information from people internally to be able to access systems, to access information. So we'll continue to see that. The manner in which they connect will be, or try to retrieve that information, will be a lot more compelling for folks. And so that's where the risk is, because things, when they feel real and they tick the boxes, people are more compelled to provide the information. So that's why deep fake, we're going to continue to see more breaches. We're going to continue to see ransom. We are starting to decrease in the staff shortage within cyber. So they're starting to, we're starting to decrease in that, but it's still there. It's still a problem. So there's not enough folks that know enough about cyber to be able to truly guide the thousands of organizations that depend on them. Right. And so folks are still going to be at risk, because they're going to be depending on people or organizations that claim to do certain things that just cannot. They won't be able to defend you when you actually need them. A lot of the organizations set themselves up on models where they have formulas where they don't expect you to call most of the time. They don't expect you to need them most of the time. And so they're able to commoditize a service and offer this economies of scale when it comes to a dollar amount, to be able to provide that service to you at an optimal price. And it's very, very attractive, and folks can't justify the ROI in their head when they're saying, well, why would I go pay 5 times as much for something when they're telling me that they can do this? And you know what, they're going to be on the hook because they're telling me that they can deliver this service, and if they can't, well, they'll be in trouble with me. Well, guess what, they won't be in trouble with you, or maybe they will, but the common denominator on there is that you'll be in trouble and having to deal with it. So is that a risk that you really want to take? The future of cyber is heavily dependent on folks understanding that there's a risk there when you're dealing with these third parties that claim to do things, and you need to be in a position to leverage AI in your organization to be able to properly defend against attackers that are absolutely using these types of solutions. Rusty, did you know that there are websites that you can go to on the dark web that offer you attack strategies leveraging bots, automation, AI as a service?
It's crazy. No, I did not know that.
So
And
that means that
I'm not surprised, but yeah.
yes, that means if you have minimal knowledge, about hacking, you can go to one of these organizations. They will sell you, or provide, a lot of times give for free, provide you with the information that you need to be able to build a sophisticated strategy to attack an organization and bring them down, leveraging AI. And it's available as a service. So the future of cyber will continue to include the constant of change. It will continue to include AI generative AI capabilities that will just be more and more sophisticated. And the fines as it pertains to risk will continue to increase because at a certain point, there's going to be too much risk for insurance companies, too much risk for banks, to lose a whole bunch of money because organizations aren't doing what they need to. And so the fines are going to increase in order to get people in a position to do what they need to do so that it mitigates the risk on the broader or the underlying infrastructure.
There's an opportunity at the community provider level to cyber posture. I mean, how do they get started? I mean, how do they, once somebody recognizes, okay, maybe my cyber posture has not been up to snuff to this point, sourcing to a third party, they've told us everything's good. I think everything should be good. Where do we go from here as a practice owner, as a practice administrator, recognizing that I've got opportunities for improvement?
Well, first thing, I think you've got to do a vulnerability assessment. Assessment of everything you've got in your infrastructure and going through and simulating where, a professional will come in and simulate different types of attacks to understand what your exposure is, identify those, and then provide you with an opportunity to address each one of them in a bespoke manner. That's to me, that's the simplest first thing that you can do. Get in, have someone do a vulnerability assessment, understand what your tolerance for risk is. So you take a risk-based approach, and then you start, once you've identified the gaps, then you start putting together a strategy with them to address. And there's a lot of different tools and techniques that you can have in play to be able to address the various scenarios that will come up and the various gaps. And so it's just about understanding what's best for your business at that point. There's a lot of service and a lot of good service providers out there with a lot of robust solutions. So, it's a professional will be able to help you identify the gaps and who some of the better solution or more optimal solutions may be for those. When we're talking vulnerability assessments, to me, you've got to bring in someone that is third party. So having the fox watching the hen house is never a good idea when it comes to cyber, or at least attesting to or identifying what your vulnerability looks like. And so what the organizations need to do is they need to bring in a third party specialist that has the capability to run vulnerability assessments on their current posture, the current stack. That's the first thing. So going to their existing service providers and say, hey, can you run a vulnerability assessment for me and tell me where our gaps are and how that's looking? It's not that they have any ill intention. It's like, when you're doing quality assurance on your own product, that doesn't work. You need someone else to do quality assurance because that's where you identify the problems. So it's the same thing with this. So you just need a third party to go in and run that vulnerability assessment to help identify the gaps for you and tell you where you need to remediate. And then you can partner with your existing service provider to help you bridge those gaps, or they may not be able to, and that's okay because then you've identified it, then you know your risk, right? And you can work with an organization to put the proper solution in place. Well, there we have it, gentlemen. I think we've gone through it a lot more in depth than we did originally. So I'm hoping our listeners find the information useful, valuable, insightful. I'd like to invite anybody that has any questions or comments to reach out to us. You can reach out on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to the Cybersecurity Boardroom on Instagram or on Facebook, where you can send us an email directly. You'll see it typically in our YouTube. You can put in comments as well. I'd also encourage you to reach out to our friend Rusty here. So Rusty, I know there's, from a healthcare point of view, you've got a lot of contacts, a lot of folks that trust you to provide them with guidance, consulting. And I think this is one of those situations where, you've got to work with folks that you trust and folks that have expertise. And so I'd invite our listeners in the healthcare space to also reach out to Rusty to help address the risk that cyber represents in their organization. So with that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for having this in-depth discussion once again. Bid you a good day, and to our listeners, I bid you a good day as well. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Cloud Warriors. You can visit them at cloudwarriors.ai. Well, have a good day, everybody. Stay safe, stay secure.